to computer. Yay.
Yay.
Welcome to Jerri's Friend-Tastic Library, the podcast where I interview everyday average people about their fantastic lives. Today we're interviewing Michele Tells. She's a midwife. Are you still a doula?
I
Doula,
am.
Lactation consultant, birth educator. You've had many hats, right?
Many hats, yes.
Yeah. So we'll just talk about all those things. Because I feel like people have a million questions around it. I feel like I know enough, but maybe I don't know everything yet. So we'll see what happens.
All right.
But yeah, how are you?
Good. Just had a weekend with a grandbaby. So now family is in the other room, so I can sit here and chill with you for a little while.
Awesome. I always start off the show by talking about how we first met, because I really like how humans connect and get to know each other. And you were like one of the first people I ever met in California, because I got here pregnant in 2014 and I went to my doctor and he was like, hey, since you're alone and just have your mom and this is your first kid, here's a flyer for like lactation, birth education, doula, all that. And it was your mom's the word flyer.
Right on.
And then me and my mom registered for your birthing class. I think is what it was. And then we found out what a doula does from the birthing class. And then we went from there. Yeah.
I think I got like 4 or 5 clients out of that class because you all came at me at the end and I was just like, oh, okay, hello.
Yeah.
I'm used to like 1 or 2 inquiring, but I wasn't used to having, like a bunch of you like right there, one lined up right after the other to talk to me. And it was great. So it was really cool.
Yeah. And at the time you weren't a midwife yet. I don't even know if that was in your sights at that time, was it?
No, it wasn't. Well, I mean, yes and no. I had always wanted to be a midwife, but it wasn't something that I had, I'd looked into it, but it never seemed to be the right time. And then, but I wasn't really looking at that point when I can't even remember when was the class that you took? Do you remember?
Oh, I arrived in like early February of 2014. I didn't even get to see a doctor until March of 2014.
Okay.
So we probably took your class sometime after that, maybe April or May.
Yeah. Okay.
Because Jared was born in August. So it was sometime in between. I know that we didn't have very long before Jared was born. So I remember that's what you were saying, like a doula is usually the full term, but we were like towards the end. I think I may have been like in the 3rd trimester already by the time you were an official doula, maybe something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
How do you describe a doula to people? Because I know how I describe it to people, but it's probably not the best.
I want to hear your description first, and then I can add to mine.
I feel like whenever people ask what a doula is, because first of all, they think it's like a made up word, or like, or they're like the Abdullah oblongata, that's like a body part, right? And they're like, I didn't know that was with pregnancy. And then I usually just describe it as like a labor support person, like a professional at it, because usually husbands or moms or siblings aren't like a professional, even if they've done it before, or they don't know all the tricks of the trade. Because that's how I felt you were for me. It was literally just me and my mom, and Chris and me were new. So like, and he had no idea what to do.
Right.
So you were like the professional to help me birth a baby.
Well, I try to be. I think it's also the objective person, kind of in the room, in the sense that there's no, it's funny because we end up with this emotional connection typically. Not all people have that connection with their clients, and that's okay because it is also a professional one. But you a lot of times you end up with that emotional connection, but you still can be objective because you've been doing this a long time, you kind of know what to expect, and then you're supporting somebody. So usually how I describe a doula or my services is that I'm emotional and physical support. I am and I'm education. So, and somebody to talk to aside from the doctor, because a lot of times the OBs walk in and they spend 5 to 15 minutes with you maximum. And your doula or your midwife can spend a lot longer talking with you. Our visits are typically an hour where we discuss about what are your fears, what are your expectations, what are you excited about, and then kind of go into detail about what your needs are, whether that's emotional needs, physical needs, educational needs, right? And then we can just add to them, or I offer resources. I typically offer a lot of different resources for people, whether it's websites, books, local websites or classes, resources and things like that, mommy and me or parent and me classes and things. So massage therapists, chiropractors, acupuncturists, other people teaching classes. Yeah.
Yeah. And like,
So,
I think a lot of the doulas that I've heard of through the internet, and you yourself do, like lactation consulting or at least breastfeeding help as well.
right.
Even if you're
Yeah.
not licensed, usually they know
Right.
enough to kind of guide you.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no licensure for lactation, but there is certification. You've kind of got your top tier lactation consultant, and then you have lactation counselors. And I'm
cool.
a lactation, I'm a lactation educator and counselor. And so yeah, everybody, all the birth doulas have some sort of breastfeeding or lactation training. And then that typically gives us the bare minimum, what we need to be able to support a birthing parent or lactating parent, afterwards, postpartum. And then if not, then we can refer to somebody who has a lot more experience than we do.
Yeah, I think it's a good networking point with the doula or birth educator of any sort. But I wanted to bring up before, because I totally want to go dive into like how you became a doula and a midwife, but I don't want to forget this question, or this point, I guess I was going to bring up, was you mentioned that OB appointments are only like 15 minutes. And I think that this is the perfect episode to completely bust the myth in Hollywood that you get some sort of magical connection with your OBGYN
Right.
and your hospital, like, is just your dream hospital event, and you get the doctor that you've been with for 9 months for every 15-minute appointment. When in reality, in America, you literally see a doctor for 15 minutes, and sometimes it's not even the same doctor every month, depending on your insurance provider. The doctor's hardly ever there whenever you actually give birth. Like, you don't go into the hospital the second you go into labor. I feel like I just get like eye twitches every time I see birthing processes in Hollywood.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting because I usually tell people, okay, so typically how people hire their provider is based on their insurance coverage, right?
Yeah.
That's what I did. I mean, I wanted a home birth, but my insurance covered 100% of my hospital birth. Yep. So that's where I went, because I didn't think I could afford a home birth. And I forgot what I was going to say about that. But, so a lot of people look for their provider first. What I really hope they do is, what kind of experience are they looking for? They need to ask themselves that when they're pregnant. What do I want? What am I looking for? And then research those options first. Find out what kind of how you envision your birth to be. Talk to, I have a love-hate relationship of talking to various people, only because you really need to speak with I don't want to say right people, but the people who have some knowledge behind, birth. The neighbor across the street who had a horrible birth is going to tell you this horrible birth story. Yeah. And then that's going to influence where you think you're going to want to go, but maybe you really don't want to go there. So kind of roundabout way of thinking about this. I tell people, think about how you envision your birth, think about where you want to deliver your baby, and then find the right provider for that. You know? So if you go to, any hospital, say you go to the hospital with the highest C-section rate, or say you find a provider and you're like, I love my provider. And then you can only go to the hospital that they go to, and they've got the highest C-section rate or cesarean rate, then chances are that you might have a cesarean, for maybe no good reason. But then you have to sit there and think about, okay, do I want that risk to be higher, or do I want it to be lower? And when you think about that, then you really need to figure out what you want for your birth, where you want to deliver, and then find the provider that's going to be able to support you in that delivery.
Yep, exactly. I 100% agree. For Jared, I was like 22 and scared and not prepared. And I enjoy the experience because it definitely was better than most in my predicament. but I think that's thanks to you, especially. And my mom was such a good support in making sure I got what I want. She was not going to let anybody like upset me on that day.
Yep.
And that, but I know for a lot of people, they just think they have no choice at all. They're just like, I have to show up and a baby has to come out. So I'm going to listen to whatever these people say, no matter my discomfort. That doesn't matter, I guess.
Yeah.
And then they end up regretting it every day after. And I know that's why with Haley, I was like, no, now I know what I'm doing and I know what to expect. So I'm going to make even more choices this time, because now I know like what choices I'm going to be faced with, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, you have a better understanding of what's in front of you, you know, and what questions to ask.
Yeah. It's like not just accepting what they say, but stopping to think about it. And simple things like assuming that you have to wear the gown that they give you is something so simple that people just take it and accept it, and then they're uncomfortable for like 3 to 5 days, however long they're in the hospital. And I was like, okay, I'm out of my C-section, give me my robe. I'm not staying in this gown, this is dumb. I don't like the weird fold holes that you gave me to breastfeed, like none of it. And it was the same after Haley was born, and it was just me and Chris because she was born in COVID. So it was just me and Chris. I immediately, once they, after C-section, you have to wait for the epidural to wear off. They have to come get the catheter out, but then you start walking. And like, for me, both times it was around 8 to 10 hours after, is like the tester where they're like, let's see if you can stand. But once I could stand, I was like, this gown's gone. I'm putting on my nursing top and I'm just wearing the weird mesh panties that you give me. And that's it. I don't care if my butt's hanging out. Like, I don't want the weird gown. But a lot of people don't realize that they can do something like that.
Yeah, they can even, you know, they can say no to the tests that, or the screens that the provider wants to do, you know. It's funny because with the medical model, it's just automatic. They hand you the labs. Okay, here you go. Do they talk with you about it? Not usually, unless you're asking questions. It's just assuming that they're going to hand you the paperwork. You're going to go get it done. You're going to get the results at the next visit, and that's that. Whereas in midwifery care, we offer you, you know, true informed consent. You know, we discuss, hey, guess what? At 28 weeks, we have a gestational diabetes screen. This is what it looks for. This is how you prepare for it. This is, you know, the pros and cons of doing this. And then what do you want to do? You know, read up. Here's more information. Do you have questions? Come back. So we discuss these things ahead of time, not just the day of, for you to try to make the decision right then and there. And it's not even the week before or the 2 weeks before your previous visit. It's, let's talk about this ahead of time, so that way you know what you're researching, what you're questioning, and then you come in with a decision. You know, and then if you do it, great. I give you the lab slips, you go, you do what you need to do. But if you decide to not do it, then you get to sign that paperwork too, that you decline. And you don't have to say why, you just decline it. And you can always change your mind. Even if you've consented, you can always say, yeah, you know what, I've changed my mind. I don't want to do this. And if you've declined it, you can always say, yeah, you know what, I've decided I'm going to go ahead and do this. Okay, great. At any time, you know.
For sure. 10 out of 10 would recommend having a midwife / doula. I feel like a doula is almost necessary at this point. Like, they should just give them out and cover them with insurance. That's my personal opinion. I know other countries, like my friend Sarah is from London, and she did an episode, and we talked a lot about birthing in different countries, because she had 2 boys in London and 1 son here, her 3rd son here. And it blew her mind that there's no midwives here. It like barely exists. You do have to pay out of pocket for it. And over there, she's like, you can give birth wherever you want, but a midwife is who does it. There are no OBGYNs. They're just midwives. So like lady doctor appointments, birthing babies, that's all midwifery care. And it was like blowing her mind with like the weird, just insurance in general blew her mind in America. And then having to birth a baby in America was like super weird. But since it was her 3rd, she wasn't like as scared, I guess, because she had already been through it and she knew what to expect. But anyways, I could talk about the issues with the system forever and ever, but I really want to know how you became a doula, because I don't think I've ever asked you how you decided to be a doula. I've known you for the transition from doula to midwife, so I knew that process.
Right. So kind of funny. Let's see. So I had my first birth experience and it was awesome. I wanted a home birth and I wanted a doula, but I felt like they were at the time unreachable for me, financially. And so I told my family what I wanted because I had my husband, my two sisters, my mom, and my best friend with me at my first birth. And I just told them, look, I want unmedicated. I want no interventions if at all possible. And they were like, okay. And so I was really lucky. My labor was fast. I had a good birth. I ended up with an episiotomy and she did not tell me about it. All of a sudden, I just felt myself being cut. Do you know what an episiotomy is?
I do, but I guarantee you 90%
Okay,
of other
I'm sure,
people
right?
don't.
Right. So, okay, I'm going to use my hand. So here we go. So here's the vaginal opening. Here's the perineum and here's your anus. So sometimes what happens is that if there's some sort of struggle with getting the baby out, or what seems to be a struggle, then they use scissors and then they cut the perineum to help the baby come out. So so they did that and she did it without my consent.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Without
it was
even
it used to be
telling me.
super routine.
Yes, it was super routine.
Because my mom had it done.
Yep. And it's not routine anymore. Even 23, gosh, Kylie's going to be 23 next month. It was people weren't using it as so much. But anyways, so all of a sudden I felt being cut and I looked at my mom who's up at my head and I'm like, what's that? And she's like, oh, honey, she's cutting you. And I'm like, what? But next thing you know, the doctor's looking at me and like, you got to push your baby out. Her heart, her heart's going down. You have to get her out as quickly as possible. Like, oh my God, okay. And then I got her out, but she also cut me. So that helped.
And
but,
I mean, just to
No,
add, if they don't cut you, I know, like my sister-in-law, they used like a vacuum suction cup on a baby's head to get it out. And I'm like, what in the 1800s is going on here?
Right.
Or like,
tried that twice, but because Kylie had so much hair, it kept sliding off. And there's some risks to using a vacuum too.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah, but they use that now over the vacuum.
And then
over the vacuum, over the forceps now.
That's what I was just going to say. So I remember whenever I went to my doctor for Jared, and he is a wonderful doctor, but I remember his nurses being like, oh my gosh, he's so great. He doesn't even use vacuums anymore. He still uses the forceps method. And I was like, what? And they were like, yeah, that's where if the baby can't come out, they basically just use tongs and they put those in there and then and I'm like, none of this sounds, it's all archaic to me, but I'm 22. What do I know?
Yeah. So anyways, it ended up being fine. And I ended up getting what? I ended up not having a good experience. My healing process was not good after that. And, but I still loved being pregnant. I loved the fact that I felt strong enough to have my baby unmedicated, and whatnot. So I looked into becoming a doula. And once I did that, we had a local organization called Doulas of Monterey County. So I got involved. And then my really close friend, Kirsten, she had a friend who was pregnant, and I just loved being able to tell her my story about it. And short story long, I guess, both Kirsten and I ended up at her birth, at this person's birth. And it was really cool because Kirsten was very, what do I want to say? She really supported the dad. She supported her friend too. And then, but once dad fainted, dad fainted, and then I was able to come in and I just supported mom. And it was just the most amazing thing ever. And then it was like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. I walked into the bedroom and I had to go to work. I was still working full time, and I crawled into bed and I snuggled up to my husband, and he's like, how'd it go? And I'm like, it went great. Now I know what I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life. He's like, okay. And we both went to sleep.
That's so cute though, that it was like a moment that changed your life.
Yeah. And
is there schooling to be a doula? Is it some sort of certification process?
There's some training. Yeah. So, I mean, you could call yourself a doula right now. You don't have to, because there's no licensure. You could just say, I want to go to a birth, and have somebody hire you, and you can go to a birth and support somebody. But if you wanted, I don't even like using this word, legitimacy, right? If somebody says, oh, have you taken a class or have you, whatever, you can do that. So yes, so I took, January of 2001, I took a training. So it was 2.5 days roughly. It was like a Friday night, Saturday, and a Sunday up in Santa Cruz, and right next door to Dominican Hospital. And that was with a DONA trainer. DONA used to stand for Doulas of North America, but now it's just
Okay.
DONA. And I did that. And then that's the month I started my business as well. Mom's the word. So January 2001, I took my training and then started the business, and it's been going ever since.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
And I always like to tell people too, because I have friends, like I recently had a friend reach out to me because she's pregnant, and it was unexpected, but not unwanted. And I gave her your info, and she was asking me about doulas and midwives and all the things. But I also like to make sure I tell people like her too, is I think they worry that doulas and I'm trying to think of a way to say it that's not mean, that doulas and midwives are like very hippie, crunchy, holistic, and almost force you to do things a certain way.
Right.
And I think it's the exact opposite, right? You never tell somebody how to birth a baby. You're like, how do you want to birth a baby? Let me help you. Right.
Well,
so it's
and
like,
yeah.
And
I think people really need to just talk to others, right? I mean, I think that was definitely an old perception. But it's not my birth. I'm done having babies, one.
yeah.
But two, even when I was, because I was a doula with my, when I was pregnant myself with my youngest, Drew. And you have to find out what's their philosophy, right? So you have to interview multiple people. But, for me, I feel really well balanced. I was, I've had so much experience in the hospital setting. And, some of it really good and some of it not so good, meaning, I didn't like the practices of some providers and nurses.
Yeah.
But you know what? Most of them are amazing, and I've had really good experiences. But what we have to do is we have to find out what is it that the client wants, right? What do they need? What are their expectations? And then, help them. I will always tell people, I will help you find out information, but it's up to you to make the decision,
Yeah.
and then I'm there to support you. I'm there to, it may not be the decision that I make, or I might help you try to ask more questions to get
Yeah.
more information, but I'm not there to convince you otherwise, and even if it's a decision that I wouldn't make, I'm with you, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm there to support you,
Yeah.
and that's what I hope, that people get from me and my experience.
Yeah. I think the aftercare with doula and midwifery is super underappreciated and unspoken about as well, because you get zero aftercare with an OBGYN. You get a 2-week checkup and a 6-week checkup where they talk to you for like 10 minutes and they're like, do you want birth control?
Right.
And that's pretty much, they're like, you can have sex, do you want birth control?
Right.
And you shouldn't be having sex 6 weeks after you have a baby, in my humble opinion. I feel like do you want birth control shouldn't be the focus at that point.
No,
That's just a whole thing that I could talk about for 2 days.
Yeah. Well, postpartum is definitely postpartum care and support is lacking here in the United States. And having doula support or midwifery support, they see you often after you have your baby to make sure everything's okay, or provide resources for you to be able to see others. But typically, the doctors only see you maybe at 2 weeks, but usually just at 6 weeks.
Yeah, I guess I was sharing my because with C-sections, they see you at 2 and then at 6.
Right.
Because they have to make sure your wound is healing.
Right.
But yeah, so I guess since I kind of already know this from knowing you, but other people don't, what kind of schooling is required for midwives to become a midwife? Because the biggest theory is that midwifery is like dirty, untrained, unscientific, at home.
That's what they used to call it.
Yeah. And I think people are surprised at how much schooling that you and how much training you have to go through before you can even catch a baby yourself and be your own actual doula.
Well, it's really interesting because there's
your own actual midwife. I said.
Well, yeah. The states, there's so many different ways, one of becoming a midwife, but also there's all the states have their own laws pertaining to midwifery. So it really depends on what kind of midwifery that you want to do, plus also where you plan to practice, right? So I had looked into, okay, so you've got 3 types, well, 4 types, I guess you could say, of midwifery. The first one is your traditional midwife. Instead, they used to call them lay midwives, but the traditional midwife, meaning that it's all apprenticeship based. Okay.
Okay.
You're reading up on you're reading up on your own books. You're practicing with, or you're training with another midwife, and who's been doing it for a long time, and that's how you become a midwife. And then and that's also kind of known as the PEP process. That's oh my gosh, I totally forgot what the PEP process is, or what it stands for.
Yeah.
But some states that are okay with the PEP process, you educate yourself. You're studying yourself. You're getting as many books as possible. And then depending on your state, whether or not you need to pass an exam and or get licensed as well. Then there's also the CM, the certified midwife, and that it goes through a master's program that is, oh my gosh, based off of the ACNM, the American College of Nurse Midwives. They support the CM licensure, and you can they incorporate you into the hospital setting, and you can do home birth. And then there's the certified nurse midwife. The certified nurse midwife is exactly that, a nurse, and then you get your master's degree to become a midwife.
Oh,
and
okay.
And then
so you would do nursing school first, and basically become an RN first.
Yep.
Okay.
And then you can do home birth or hospital birth. And you can do hospital birth in all states, but then most states allow you to do home birth as well as a CNM. And my preceptor locally is a CNM.
Okay.
And here in Carmel Valley, and she does only only home birth. But yeah, so then there's me. You have also then a certified professional midwife, and a certified professional midwife is you've gone through schooling. So whether it's accredited with a certain school or you've done just your own education, then you sit for an exam given out by NARM, which is North American Registry of Midwives, and then you're a midwife if you pass that. And then depending on your state, then you can add licensure. So in California, I had to go through a very specific accreditation program, a minimum of 2 years for the program. And then, but mine took me, I started school in January of 2016, and I got licensed in October of 2020. And I passed my exam in September of 2020. So I went through the schooling, but I got my book work done before I got my clinical work done, because your clinical work is where you're sitting side by side, learning how to, do vitals on mom and baby. You're learning how to catch babies. You're learning how to manage emergencies and things like that, learning paperwork, etc. And some of those requirements are harder to come by, so you have to, it just takes time,
because you basically have to wait for I would assume you'd have to wait for an emergency to appear to really understand it.
And then so there are different ways you can get that experience. And then once you finish school, once you finish your clinicals, then you can apply to NARM to pass to take the test. Then you take that test, you pass it, and then you apply to, then I had to apply to California with the medical board. So I'm licensed by the medical board, the same board that licenses doctors.
Yeah.
And so
nurses and all other medical professionals.
No. So nurses have their own board that they're
fascinating.
Yeah. So but I am licensed by the same ones that oversee OBs. And we're trying to actually get our own board licensed by midwives rather than licensed by, medical providers. So and then, so once I got my license, which I had to, go through background check, fingerprints, etc., then I could open my practice. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you want to do only home births, or are you going to do like a mix, or?
Do you care? Do you have a preference?
I can't do hospital births. The state of California doesn't allow me to do hospital births. So I can only do home births. So that's what I'm doing. That's my focus right now. And while I build my practice, I'm still taking on doula clients as well. But I may never give that up because that was what I started out as,
Yeah. It's like
and
nostalgic.
I love the work. Yeah.
Do they have birthing centers here? I've seen them on TV. I don't know if they have them here where you show up and it looks like a bedroom.
Yep.
Can midwives practice there?
Yep. We have one. So we have the Monterey Birth and Wellness Center in Monterey in Ryan Ranch. And there are 4 licensed midwives there. Cool. And they were once home birth midwives, and now they're completely in the birth center setting. And then we also have a birth center in Santa Cruz, and that's Full Moon. And she's also a licensed midwife there. And so she just was able to buy her building. So now the building is completely hers.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's another one that goes under the radar that people don't know is an option. Is it's kind of like the perfect in between where you don't want your house to get messed up.
Right.
Or have to deal with anything at your own house, but you go to a place and it's like a huge room that literally has like a king size bed, bassinets, like chairs, all the things that it literally looks like a living room / bedroom or studio apartment.
Yep.
So you get like the best of both worlds.
Yep. And I was trained in 3 of them. So I was trained in one up in Ukiah. My first one was down in San Luis Obispo. Then I went up to Ukiah, and to get the last of my experiences, I went out to Virginia at the end of 2019, November of 2019, and I was gone for 7 weeks, and was part of 27 births during that time. Crazy. In 7 weeks. Yeah.
It's a lot of births to go through there. Do they at those birthing centers, do they have like a timetable similar to hospitals where they kind of like want you to move along so they can open the room for somebody else?
No, I mean, so basically when you are giving birth in the birth center, you're there anywhere. Typically, I would say at the minimum, bare minimum would be 2 hours that you're there postpartum. And then sometimes 6 to 12 hours postpartum you stay, and then you're sent home. So what they want to do is they want to make sure that you and the baby are completely stable. They want to make sure you've had a shower, you've peed, you've eaten, you're drinking, your vitals are stable, baby's breastfed, and baby's vitals are stable, warm, getting warm, etc. And then once everybody's good, then they help pack you up, and then you go home.
Okay, because I know that there was a video that you gave me about home birth, because that's what helped get my mom and Chris on board whenever I first suggested it. And I know that they talked in there about how hospitals have policies because they need room for more people to come in and give birth. So if your labor is taking more than 24 hours, they're going to want to start doing this intervention. And now if you're past 30 hours, they need to do this intervention. Okay. And like, so that, right?
Got it. Okay. So you're talking about so if a labor is taking longer, it just depends on what is happening, right? If it's something where we're like, okay, nothing is progressing, or if things aren't progressing, and then there's potential risk for infection, etc., then we do move you along. But it really depends on the situation. It can't be a hard, okay, at 6 hours, if you haven't delivered by the time you've gotten here, then we're sending you off to the hospital. It depends on what's going on. Some midwives are okay with bags of water being broken for a certain, it just depends, a certain period of time before they're like, okay, this isn't comfortable for me anymore, we're sending you off. And it also depends too on our state regs, so our regulations as well. What does our law say? And so we have to abide by those as well.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. Yeah, I feel like hospital policy changes I would assume it would change per state or even county based on the laws there as well. But that was fascinating whenever I learned that on the tape that you gave me. I can't remember what it was called. It was called like Why Home?
Why Not Home? That's a great video. I love that video. It's what's really cool about it is that it's a documentary created by a nurse.
Yeah, it was medical professionals that chose to have home births.
Yeah. And so she puts, not only does she put in the stats, and then the doctors or the nurses themselves are saying, hey, these are the stats in the hospital. We work here. We don't like these stats ourselves. So we're choosing to have out of hospital birth, you know?
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, and I think that's true for a lot of nurses, is like, and you see it all the time. They're like the heart and soul of the birthing center. And it's like, we know what you're going through and we hate all these policies that we have to follow, but we're just going to try to make this the best for you anyways.
Yeah. But then, you know, and then we help, hopefully they help them manage, or be able to ask those questions that they, you know, need to ask in order to make decisions, you know, not just thrown into like, okay, so here's the next step. And then they're standing, are you okay with that? And then they're standing over you, right? Like,
yeah,
what are you going to tell me? You know, we want you to say yes to this.
Yeah.
But, and so hopefully your doula, right, or your educator has helped you learn what questions to ask in those situations.
Yeah, I think another thing that's helpful with doulas or midwives or any other third party, like you were saying, is even if you're like a super strong independent woman and you have all the things in your head, there's like a lot going on while you're in labor, and like your normal brain isn't working anymore. It's like your fight or flight brain at that point. So you're probably not going to be in a good space to ask the questions that you thought you would ask anyways.
Right.
Because everything in you is like, this needs to stop. We need to get this out of here as soon as possible. That was my personal experience.
Right. Well, then that's when your partner, right? So when I'm teaching childbirth ed classes, you know, I talk to the, you know, both the parents say, hey, how do you want your partner to respond to things? You know, do you want them to say anything or, you know, not? And then it's like, oh, I didn't think about that before. And I'm like, well, when you're in the middle of a contraction or in pain, or, you know, you're not going to want to think about anything else. So somebody, you know, you're going to be focused on one thing. So who else can speak for you or talk with you, you know? Yeah.
I've heard stories of women that are getting like C-sections. And so you're literally like strapped to the table, full epidural, you're totally out of it. Not totally out of it, but you know, you're like not in your normal brain. Right. And then the doctors are like, are you going to have more kids? Because if you're going to have more kids, then I'll do this a certain way or that. And they're like, what the fuck is going on? Like, is this real life right now? Yeah. Like I'm in the middle of the most traumatic portion of my life. You're like, and then you're asking. And so that's something that I think people aren't prepared to hear. And I've heard that from so many other, because I know so many women that have had C-sections. I think we kind of find each other.
Right.
Right. And yeah, I've heard that so many. I was lucky enough that nobody asked me that mid incision.
I don't remember anybody ever asking any of my clients that question.
But so yeah, I was definitely intrigued by that. And then, but I have heard, so with Haley, whenever I went to go get the C-section with Haley, they're doing everything. They put the curtain up. So whatever they're doing down there, I have no clue. Can't feel a thing, can't see a thing. They could be removing my legs and I wouldn't know about it. And they're like, but then they're like oohing and ahhing over the scar. They're like, oh, this is a nice scar. This is in a really good place. You're so lucky. And I'm like, thanks, I guess. Like,
well, and you know, some people actually are very put off by the chit chat that goes on in the room in the OR during a cesarean, because this is, you know, when you're talking about, you know, what restaurant you went to last night, you know, with your best friend or whatnot, you know, some people are like, this is hard that I'm going through this, or this wasn't expected. Why are we doing this? Why are you talking about the steak you had last night when I'm sitting here crying that, you know, I'm having a cesarean or it didn't go the way I was hoping. And you're talking something that's nonsense to me. Right? You know, so there's a big movement to get providers and nurses to not do that sort of thing while they're doing surgery.
Yeah, it was definitely unexpected. I think I would have been more upset if they were talking about their dinner and whatnot, but I was definitely traumatized because Haley's was like very instant, where they pressed all the alarms and they were like, we got to go now. And I was freaking out that Chris wasn't going to be there, or I was going to die, or Haley was going to die.
And then I couldn't go with you.
No, you couldn't go because it was COVID. So you and Chris are stuck there like with it, like John Travolta, and I'm like rolling away. And Yeah, I was crying. And the one nurse was super duper nice. The anesthesiologist, her name was Leanna. She was super duper nice. I remembered her because I was like, you're still here? Like I here forever. And
Right.
but yeah, then the nurses were talking, and then Dr. Goodwin was the one that delivered Haley, and he was like who did this? And I was like, oh, it's Dr. Keith. And then they were like, oh, Dr. Keith and Dr. Goodwin studied together. And then he had delivered one of the nurses that was working there, because they both started like in the 90s, I think he said.
Yeah.
And I was born in the 90s. So I was like, oh, that makes sense. So I got lucky both times, but that doesn't happen to I've heard so many C-section horror stories. Like the fact that they staple women, like again, that's like so archaic to me. I'm like, what is happening? Like what is happening in the medical world right now?
They do that because some doctors prefer it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting to me how there are so many different things. So I was training when I was a Lamaze trainer, and I was training some nurses from Texas who had come out to Pacific Grove, excuse me, to take this training. And we were discussing, what kinds of things that, would help mom during labor and whatnot. And I said, gosh, there are still some places that don't allow birthing or laboring women or people to eat or drink during labor. And these two came from a small town in Texas, and they're like, our hospital doesn't allow us to feed or give mom any water. Yep. And I was just like, excuse me. Yep. Like, what do you mean? They're using up all their resources, and they're like, yep, they only get an IV. Yep. I'm grateful that our area does not do that here. And even it's so different too, up and down the state of California as well, so is it a small rural hospital? Is it a bigger hospital? And, it's so funny because if you could take a little bit of everything from each hospital, right, or birthing center or whatever, and you could have this amazing, awesome birthing place for people. But, everything is, the rules and regulations and the policies are so different from place to place.
Yeah. And I don't remember eating anything whenever I was in labor with Jared, but you really forget all of it. It's really true what they say. Right. I know with Haley, I feel like with Haley, they didn't really do it too bad, but we were at home both times for a long time with both labors. Right. But I know after Jared was born, they were giving me a hard time about eating because I threw up the whole time. I was even throwing up like on the C-section table. They had to like tilt my head.
So that's the worst.
They were like prolonging until I could eat. And I'm like, dude, what the heck?
It makes it worse.
And with Haley, luckily, I still had the vomiting problem with Haley, and I was still very nauseous, but the nurses were so super sweet at Natividad. And I remember she came in and she was like, they don't want you to eat anything, but I'm going to bring you Jell-O. And then I was like, cool. And then 2 hours later, she was like, did you throw up? And I was like, nope. And she was like, okay, here's broth. Yeah. And so she just like got stuff from the snack cart for me, because she was like, this is stupid. We can't let you not eat for 4 hours. Right. Like, what is that? You're supposed to be breastfeeding a baby and taking care of a baby while you can't feel your legs still because you have an epidural.
You have nothing in there, like I'll never forget, after I gave birth to Drew, my 15-year-old, my brother-in-law, who was asleep down in the parking garage, we called him, okay, baby's born. So he comes upstairs and he looks at me and he's like, I want a turkey sandwich. Good.
I think it froze for a second because I can hear the wind. But anyways, so he came up and you said you wanted a turkey sandwich?
I wanted a turkey sandwich so bad. And it was 2:00 in the morning. He's like, I got you. And he ran to Safeway. And it's funny because they've all, anyways. So he ran to the Safeway that was open 24 hours. And he schmoozed with the young gal behind the counter. She's like, well, we've got turkey sandwiches right here already made. He goes, nuh-uh. He's like, my sister-in-law just had a baby an hour ago. She needs a fresh turkey sandwich. So he had her make me a fresh turkey sandwich with everything on it, and then brought bags of chips. So we're sitting here at 3:00 in the morning, all of us are eating turkey sandwiches and having bags of chips. It was the best meal ever.
That's awesome. I do love that the nurse, I feel like the nurses at Natividad were more caring about the food situation, especially during COVID. It was hard because you couldn't just go to the cafeteria.
Yeah.
But they would have the snack cart come around, and then they would ask if you wanted anything. And I'm like, yes, 2 of everything. And the snack cart was stuff like cheese sticks, yogurts, uncrustable peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and like the turkey and cheese sandwiches on like wheat, the little half triangles.
Yep.
And they would bring me a whole tray. And that way throughout the night, I could like graze, because you're getting up like every hour to feed a baby, if not more often, whenever they're first born. And then Chris was allowed to leave for the night. And then the morning he could come back, but they would have to like redo all the checks for COVID. And he would bring breakfast, but I would tell him to make sure that he brings enough, because I would eat my breakfast and his. Because again, you don't get to choose what you eat in COVID. They just bring a tray, like at a nursing home. There's no like menu option anymore. You just get what they give you.
Here it is. Yep.
And yeah, so that was like he brought some good breakfast though. I was happy with it. He brought like breakfast burritos one day and stuff.
Oh, good.
But yeah. So I think people don't, I guess people that run hospitals don't realize how much food you actually need and how hungry you are, because you're like you said, you're exerting everything, like every ounce of your energy is exerted during giving birth. And then I think I read somewhere that breastfeeding burns like an extra 1,000 calories a day or something.
Oh yeah,
crazy.
it's crazy. That was my weight loss plan. Because I dropped so much weight when I was breastfeeding. It's funny, my metabolism completely changed when I was pregnant and breastfeeding. I only gained and I was overweight when I put on weight, or when I got pregnant. And for my first one, I only gained 11 pounds. And with my second one, I only gained 8 pounds, and they were both 7.5 pounds when they were born. And then I dropped a bunch of weight after, because of breastfeeding. Yeah. And so it's so different for everybody, yeah, it really is. So it just depends on what your body needs.
Yeah, with Jared, I gained all the weight. Like I gained like 60 pounds or something while I was pregnant with Jared, because I was just like sitting on my couch, like just dealing with all the shit that was going on in my life and eating. And I had just met Chris, so we were going out all the time and eating and stuff. Right. And I remember I delivered Jared, and whenever they weighed me on my weight in, I was like 190 something. And then with Haley, I started overweight in like the 200s ish, maybe like 215, 220. And then I lost weight while I was pregnant with Haley. So I ended up delivering Haley at almost about 190. I was about the same size in my third trimester for both kids. Yeah. And then breastfeeding, because I didn't breastfeed Jared for very long, but with Haley I did it for 6 months. And I it was like an excellent weight loss thing. Right. Sure. But then once you stop, everything. It just comes back with a vengeance. But yeah. And I think it's I don't know if this was everywhere or maybe it was just the East Coast, but I've heard multiple people say that like people didn't breastfeed in the 90s. Is that like pretty true, or was that like an outlook, or maybe it was like the 80s? I know that whenever my mom,
it was the 80s.
Because I was born in 92, and I remember my mom being like, yeah, we were upset that we couldn't smoke, and like they were still asking if we wanted a bottle, and we're like, yeah, we want to, like, we're not going to breastfeed. Yeah. And that was just the culture. That's just what they did. It was like, if you breastfed, you were poor or something. And I think that's the most bizarre ideal to have in a modern day. Like, I don't know.
It's and it varies too from state to state as well, from county to county, depending on where you are, right? Typically, if I remember this correctly, breastfeeding, I think it was, how do I want to put this? I don't remember if it was more education. As time went by, you had more education. But yeah, so the reason why, not the reason why, but it's changed so much because they realize the benefits of it, of breastfeeding, compared to formula feeding. However, also when a baby needs to put on weight, and if mom doesn't have the milk supply, then absolutely formula needs to be offered. But yeah, it just really depends on your education, meaning that what have you been exposed to? That's, I guess, what I want to say.
Yeah.
Like, what have you been exposed
I guess your experiences,
to, right?
Yeah. Because
so
my thing is like, I'm all about, as long as your baby's happy, I don't care. It's not my business how you eat, baby. Literally, it does not affect my life at all. Yeah. So and I've used both. I've used all the ways basically to feed a baby. I guess besides a tube, but yeah, it's just crazy that they stigmatize one or the other so much, like all the time. Because back then it was like, if you're breastfeeding, you're poor. And I feel like now, especially where we live in California, it's like, if you're not breastfeeding, you're doing it wrong or you're bad.
Right.
And I'm like, dude, formula has saved so many babies' lives.
Yeah,
like,
it has. It has. It's funny because my mother breastfed my youngest sister. I'm 9 years older than my youngest sister. And so I was exposed to it early. And so it was just an expectation, that I would do it. And I was very lucky that my babies breastfed well. I breastfed both of them. Well, my first one until she was 4, and my second one was almost 4.
Yeah.
And, but it's funny. When I go do breastfeeding support with some people, if I see the lactating parent upset and it becomes more stressful, I validate them and let them know that it's okay to let the breastfeeding go if they feel as though they're not able to bond with their baby.
Yeah.
And I've had so many of them look at me and be like, oh my gosh, I'm happy to work with you as much as you want me to work with you. That's no problem. But I'm also here to let you know that your mental health and your bonding with your baby is so much more important than because you're going to do that too with your baby, with however you're going to feed your baby, so it's really, you have to be able to validate and listen.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of making sure that like your mental status is on point. And I've heard it from multiple different kinds of professionals in the industry. That's like, what's not going to affect your kid whenever they're 27? How you sleep trained them, or how you fed them, or how many diapers you changed, or what material your diaper was. But what is going to affect your kid whenever they're 27 is like your mental state, because they're going to remember if you were miserable, or if you were unhappy, or if you had a mental breakdown. They're going to remember all of that. They're not going to remember any of that shit in the beginning. And so whenever we did Haley's sleep training at 6 months, because she was not, we co-slept with Jared. I guess I should call it bed sharing, because people definitely differentiate.
They have
Yes. So we were pro bed sharing. I did all the research with Jared, and it was just easier. And Jared was bottle fed, but I still liked sleeping next to him. So we did it. There's safe ways to do it. You can at me in the comments if you want to fight about it. That's fine. Or judge me. I'm not gonna reply, but you're welcome to your opinion. And so with Haley, I was like, that's what I'm doing. I like sleeping with my baby. But she was not having it. She was not happy. And so after 6 months, we did a gentle sleep train where she just gets her own bed in our room next to us. And we have to calm her to sleep that way.
Right.
But I remember that was one of the things in the video was like, I promise you, it's going to hurt you to listen to them cry for like a little bit while you're sitting there, but this isn't going to traumatize them forever. What is going to traumatize them is if you never get any sleep again and you're just the worst parent every day of your life. And
making decisions for parents as a parent is so hard. And
then I listened to this podcast through Latched Mama, which is like a nursing clothing brand that I buy and support from, and they have a podcast. And I can't remember which episode it was or who she had on there, but they were talking about, it may have been the woman that I did the sleep class through. But she was like, yeah, everybody's like, what's wrong with moms? Maybe they need Xanax. Maybe like they're depressed. And they're like, no, they don't fucking sleep. Like one day they came home with a baby and they just like never slept for the next however long. And if you take any person and like ruin their sleep schedule, then they're just going to be miserable. Like if you get 4 hours of sleep one night and you're used to getting 8, you're just pissed the whole next day. And that just happens forever now.
And they don't feel like themselves, and then depression can hit, and so many things can happen if you don't have enough sleep on board, for sure.
And that's not even putting in the pressure and anxiety of like taking care of a whole nother human, or it doesn't take into account the hormonal imbalances that you go through. None of it. It doesn't take into account the fact that like now something needs you to feed it every day. It's just
multiple times a day. Doesn't matter what you're doing. If the baby needs to be fed, guess what? You're dropping what you're doing so you can feed your baby.
And whether you're bottle or breastfeeding, that means you have to hold that baby every time it needs fed, because it's not really recommended to set them down somewhere to feed them. There's like dangers that can happen. I mean, you do you, I won't judge, but you generally, somebody's got to hold that baby while it eats for like a while. Like
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty crazy, but I don't want to keep too long, but I wanted to ask the cost of home birth, because it's come up multiple times while we talked about it, and not worrying that you can't afford it.
Right.
And I think that's everybody's like deal, is even if this all sounds good and you've sold me, Jerri and Michele, home birth for me, right? But like,
right.
What is the general cost for a home birth?
Well, here in Monterey County, I believe the average is about $7,800 for the entire care, though. So if you come in at, say, 10, 12 weeks, then you're with your midwife until 6 weeks postpartum, which is really cool. So that $7,800 covers you from when you come in, whether it's early or late in pregnancy, to labor and birth, to 6 weeks postpartum. And then, of course, ultrasounds and labs are extra. But what many of us do is that many of us will talk to you about, the affordability of it for yourself. Myself personally, so not only will everybody discuss the affordability of it for yourself, but also payment plans. We all offer payment plans. And then for me, what I do is I go off of the federal poverty guidelines. And so I build that into my sliding scale. So if somebody comes to me and says, I really want a home birth, but I can't afford $7,800, then I ask them what they make. And they don't have to prove anything to me, because I just think that's,
we're on the honor system here.
I'm going to trust that you're telling me the truth. And then I plug it into my system, and then there's a range. What does that look like for you? And then we go from there, and they can still do payment plans with me as well, even with a sliding scale, because I want to make midwifery accessible for everybody. So it doesn't matter how much you make, where you live, I want to make it accessible for all.
Yeah, I love that you have a sliding scale. I don't know if that's super common, because I don't like to price shame either. I think you're worth any midwife is worth every penny that you give them. But I'm quickly Googling the average cost of a hospital birth. So a hospital birth on average in California is $27,000. That's not going to include C-section or needing to stay longer.
Right.
As far as US is considered, I'm not sure, but I think Jared's was a C-section at Chomp, and it might have been in the 30s. I think it was like 30 something thousand. And I think it's important for people to know that most insurance plans do the 90-10. A lot of times it's 90-10, which means you're responsible for 10%, which means my mom paid $3,600 for Jared's birth.
Yeah.
So that's why whenever we talk to you about you being the assistant midwife, because you were still apprenticing under the other woman, she was like, well, shit, this isn't much more than what I paid for Jared's. And now you get the care that you want instead of what you had for him. So I always think that's important to tell people too, as it is out of pocket, but like you said, it's over basically a year. I mean, 46 weeks ish. So a year is 52 weeks. It's almost a full year.
Yeah.
And you're going to probably pay half of that at least with a hospital birth, depending on your insurance. Like since I was under state medical, it was 100% covered, but I got no say in anything.
Right.
Which is why I had you and your midwife that you apprenticed under as like double care, because we tried home birth and then we had to get a C-section. But either way, I think that's important too. If you have insurance, it's not a problem to do both for a while and test the waters and see what's what. I mean,
and sometimes you can get reimbursement from your insurance. Once you pay the midwife, then they can give you a super bill, and then you can submit that to your insurance, except for Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal, unless your midwife is with Medi-Cal or is contracted with Medi-Cal, they won't reimburse you. But if you are contracted with Medi-Cal, they'll reimburse you some. Or the midwife, actually, I can't even say you as the client, because Medi-Cal will only pay a certain amount. That's a different story. But if you say you have private insurance, Blue Cross Blue Shield, right? And then you come to me and I say $7,800, my requirement is that you pay me $7,800. And then once that's paid, then I give you a super bill, and then you submit that to your insurance and hope that they'll reimburse you something. And sometimes it's, 10%, sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's half,
Yeah.
It just really depends on how much you want to fight for it too.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people don't realize that you can get like a lot of insurance companies will offer a free breast pump. Like you can purchase now,
right?
And they'll reimburse you for it. Or if you do birth in a hospital, a lot of times they'll send you with one home as long as you tell them ahead of time. There's a lot of things I feel like people don't know because they just see birth on TV.
Right.
And think that's how it happens. Or they hear a birth story from like their mom or something, which is totally different than what it is now. Like birthing is nowhere near the same as it was whenever my mom gave birth to me. Yeah. So whether you think it's better or worse, that's up to you. But
ask your questions. That's the biggest thing. It's really ask your questions.
I think birthing stories are super important too, even if they're really short. Mine were only a page long both times. Like, here's the things that need to happen. The end. I'm done.
Yeah. Exactly.
Some people write a novel. Other people bullet system.
Yeah. Your the birth plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think every person's different, but I think it's at least important to, even if it's just like a messy note.
Right.
Like,
even if it's just like a paragraph and says, here's what I need or what I don't need from you, I had somebody actually, she's like, no, I don't want a birth plan, but I am going to tell them how to get to my cervix. And I'm like, okay. And the reason why was because her cervix was just, she's like, it's off and, somewhere in there. And she says, but what happened is that every time somebody would check my cervix, it hurt.
Yeah.
Painful.
Yeah.
And she didn't want to go through that throughout labor. Yeah. So she told them how to get there. And the nurses at first were kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. And she's like, no, I'm serious. Take the birth plan, read the paragraph while you're doing my cervical exam. And they did, and they found it right away, and she wasn't in pain. And they're like, oh my gosh, I did exactly what you told me to do. And she's like, see, and I'm not in pain, and everybody's happy. And they're like, thank you so much. I mean, it was just those little things that make such a big difference.
Yeah. Was it you that I'm pretty sure you shared it on Instagram where you talked about getting going to the hospital to give birth and they're constantly checking your cervix and it was all the sea urchins like closing up or something like that.
Oh, I think I did. That was a meme or something.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that I didn't think about the first time, and most people don't. And then I was very conscious with it the second time, because that's like, I don't know why they just love doing that in the hospital. They just love it. Like they have to do it every 2 hours or something crazy. And it's like super indignifying, super inconvenient to have to get in this bed, and just having anybody and everybody up there, whoever wants to and needs to, I guess, around here. And like, and then I remember asking you whenever we were doing the whole, what would you call that? Like the interviewing or like starting process of the intake forms, I guess, for midwifery. Yeah. And I was like, okay, so how often do you have to like check things? And you're like, a baby will come out eventually. There's no reason to like have hands in there every 2 hours. We'll be able to see if a head is popping out. I assure you. And I was like,
usually there's some sort of, I mean, so you could check yourself,
Yeah.
And, but there's a lot of times it's not giving us a whole lot of information to be all up in there, unless it's been like for hours and hours. And then we're like, maybe we need to, maybe that can help us. I'm not saying it doesn't give us any information. It really depends on what's happening at that moment.
Yeah. And sometimes it is nice to know, like after I was in labor for 24 hours, I was like, how much longer is this going to take? Can we figure it out? But for the rest of the time, and like you were saying before, it's like they don't even ask consent. They just come in with a clipboard and they're like, time to check your cervix. And you're like, okay, I guess this is usually like between me and my husband, but fine. I don't know you. I just met you today.
Exactly.
But, so yeah, it's completely insane the amount of things that happen. And I even remember whenever Chris came, because we got pregnant before COVID happened. We got pregnant in December, but Haley was born in August. So in January, I did my first official like doctor's appointment after they confirmed the pregnancy through like the Medi-Cal offices. And they had to do a regular gynecology appointment because I hadn't seen a gynecologist since Jared was born.
Right.
Excuse me. So that he comes for the appointment because he wanted to be there for all of them, even though COVID fucked that up.
Right.
But he's sitting there in the chair while my legs are in the stirrups, and they're doing like all the checks with like the speculum toothbrush looking thing.
Right.
He was like freaking out. He was like, his face was like tucked in his shirt.
Oh no.
He was like, what are these, like with wide eyes, like, what all are they putting in there? Like, it's like a Mary Poppins bag. What is happening? He had like no clue what happened in those appointments until that day. And it was mind-blowing.
Yeah. That's funny. I could just see him now.
Yeah. So I feel like no matter who's giving, like even if you're not giving birth, I feel like if you're a person that needs to go have gynecology appointments done, your supporting partner should probably be there to witness it if they've never seen it, to really understand like what all has to happen.
What is going on?
Yeah. And I think that helped him understand too, along with like the why not home video of me being like, no, I don't want just like Tom, Dick, and Harry's hands up in here.
Right.
And there needs to be like an atmosphere to happen for me to be happy, because it's super weird.
Yeah.
Like,
it's so different. I mean, there are a lot of pregnancies that are low risk and normal.
Yeah.
You know, and people who deliver their babies in a hospital setting, that should be left for high risk, you know, birth.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, if that person is comfortable to go there, that's fine. You know, I think the biggest thing for me is just, we should allow them options. They should know more about what's available to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know with Jared for sure, if you hadn't have been there, everything would have gone on way more quickly and the doctor would have been happy, but I probably would have been super upset years later that all of that happened, like breaking my bag without my consent or not giving me an opportunity to think about it or things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we could talk about it for hours, but I don't want to keep all of your time. Before we end, I always ask random questions that have absolutely nothing to do with what we've talked about, but I ask every guest. Do you have a Winnie the Pooh character that you identify with?
You know, it's funny. I always loved Pooh. Just because he's just kind of like this, hey, you know. Oh gosh, but I don't know. I think probably Kanga, because she's the Kanga, right? Yeah. She's the mom of the group, you know. That
makes so much sense. People forget about Kanga.
Yeah, you know, I mean, she takes care of everybody and puts the scarf on Rue, and you know, and
she's always making cookies.
Yeah, she's so I think that's probably who I would identify with.
That's probably a good one. I always say Chris is Winnie the Pooh. He's like, nothing bothers that guy, and he's just like so simple in the best way. My mom thinks I'm a Tigger, so I think outwardly I'm a Tigger, but inwardly I'm definitely Eeyore.
I was gonna say Eeyore.
But yeah, do you have a favorite Spice Girl?
I don't even know the Spice Girls.
Same. Someone asked, someone was like, hey, ask what their favorite Spice Girl is. And so now I just need to know everybody's, but I don't actually, I know like their top 2 or 3 songs, but I don't know.
I don't know them.
Cool. Do you have a favorite spice that you use regularly?
I mean, you know what? Salt and pepper.
That's a good one. I feel like people are afraid to say that. And they come up with like something fancy.
The Food Network is actually when they, you know, came up with all of their, you know, this is how you make this, you know, this recipe and whatnot. And the biggest takeaway I got from it is that how much salt and pepper they use to bring out the flavors of everything else. Right. Yeah. And so, that's like the first thing in my recipe, and any recipe is, does it have enough salt and pepper in it? Because then that's going to help everything else come out.
Yep. And I'm the person that like automatically salt and peppers food the second it came to the table. It doesn't matter if I cooked it or if somebody else cooked it. I'm like, I need salt and pepper first. No, I didn't taste it. I know you're going to judge me, but it's like a mental thing at this point. Yeah. Or at least like sometimes you can see black pepper. So sometimes I won't do that, but I'll just do the salt. But yeah. So I'm the person they have to warn. They're like, this is super salty. So maybe just test it first. But yeah, I've heard all kinds of crazy spice. I do agree. I know that what really upped my pasta game was the Food Network. I think it might've been Gordon Ramsay even. That was like, I want it to taste like the sea whenever you boil pasta. Your water needs to taste like seawater because it boils out. And so it adds a bunch of flavor. And then butter. I love whenever
Butter.
they tell you the secret. They're like, you know that steak you love at the restaurant? It's because they put a stick of butter on there.
Yep.
You just love butter.
I put it in there and I'm like, I can't believe how much I'm using. My arteries are like, what the heck, Michelle? But I'm like, oh, but it helps so much.
Yeah, it tastes good. I'm trying to think of the other ones. There's always the Spice Girls, the Winnie the Pooh characters. Sometimes I ask if you like people with kids. I don't know if you've seen Encanto, but
we love Encanto.
Do you have like an Encanto character that's your favorite or that you identify with?
So with Maribel.
Yeah, she's a super good character and classic pick for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think I identify with one of them as much as the other, but I really love what's her sister's name? Isabel, the one that makes the flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because she figures out that she can grow so many more cool things once she stops caring like what her grandma thinks.
Yep.
And I'm like doing that actively right now where I'm like not caring what people think of my YouTube content. I'm just making it. Or like I'm not caring what people think of my singing voice. I'm just gonna sing anyways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't remember if there's any more. I should have written them down. I'm getting really lazy where I'm like, I'm not going to take notes. I don't need them.
Right.
But yeah, I'm super glad you were on. I think it's super knowledgeable and important. I hope other people like it because I had a surrogate on here and I think they go really nice.
I need to watch that one.
She's really cool.
Yeah.
And I follow, if you follow Melissa on Instagram, she's doing her second surrogate journey and she always puts in her stories like her process. So a couple days ago, she just posted that she went in where they had to insert a balloon into her uterus to check the lining of the uterus.
Oh.
And then just do all other like doctor exams while they're down there.
Wow.
And then so now she's going to start the IVF meds.
Okay.
And then from there, they'll implant an egg eventually, but it's like a lot that goes into that to make sure, because these eggs are precious, right? Like they're embryos. These embryos are precious and very, very expensive. So
I've supported one mom through her IVF journey 3 times.
Wow. That's amazing.
And they were all 3 babies were all IVF.
That's awesome.
So I've got lots of stories, but that'll be another day.
For sure. Maybe we'll have you back on another time because everybody's requesting Melissa do a second one after her second baby.
Sweet. Born. Right on.
So yeah,
awesome.
I always love returning guests. Yeah. But yeah, thank you for being on it.
You're welcome, Jerri.
I hope you had fun.
Yes, I did.
I'll stop the recording, but it won't end the call. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Bye.
You know what I was going to ask? Yes. I almost forgot.
Okay.
Do you have anything you want to tell the people before we end it? That's always a good one. Like one takeaway or one awesome Michele Niza motto?
I don't have any mottos. But I think the biggest thing I would say to people is don't assume. A couple of things I'll add. Don't assume that you can't have a home birth or an out of hospital birth for your first baby. You have to have a hospital birth first, and then you'll have an out of hospital birth with your second baby. Somebody I know said that she's like, I should have listened to you and done it the first time. And she didn't. She did a hospital birth first and it was fine. But then she did the home birth afterwards. And I got to catch that baby.
That's awesome.
It was the most amazing thing ever. And she was like, should have done it the first time too. So that was one. So, but also the other thing is just interview, ask questions, talk to people, do consults. It's not even that you're interviewing, it's that you're consulting. You're finding out, you're asking all of your questions, you're finding out all of the equipment that we're carrying. We're finding out everything about what it is that we do, we can do, what we can't do, and then helping you understand it before you assume that we're not going to be helpful for you or it's not going to be what you imagine, if that makes sense.
I mean, we live in the age where you can just get information so easily, like just YouTube something or Google something. Right. I assure you'll find all the info you ever need. Yeah. Because I know for sure there's like whole podcasts and YouTube channels with doulas and midwifery.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But really, I think, find out about your local community, wherever you're going to be, interview a few so that way, or at least consult with a few. So that way you can get your questions answered and and connect with them, right? There's nothing better than sitting down with somebody, having tea or coffee with them and say, hey, tell me about yourself,
Yeah, exactly. I love that. All right. Thank you so much. I'll end it.
You're welcome. All right. Bye,
Okay,
bye.
bye.
Yep.